Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. My name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment, much of which is done online these days. The assessment is virtual, the workshops are virtual. We're not allowed to leave our homes, so everything is happening online. That's not true. Some people are allowed to leave their homes. I'm also the founder of the HR Hot Seat Inclusive Mastermind community, which is, as we say, a community of real HR pros solving real HR problems, over 2,600 members now in 10 different chapters around the country. And we are entirely free and entirely virtual. And we do a lot to support folks in job transition, HR practitioners who are looking to solve challenges that they face in their work and in their job searches. The list goes on and on. You can find out more about HR Hot Seat at, guess what, hrhotseat.com. Today, you are here for a Harmony Insights lunch date, something that I started a few months ago as a series to be inspired by people who inspire me, so that I take a break out of my lunch hour, which it is here in the Central Time Zone in the US, get some inspiration from somebody that I really respect and admire, and then go about my afternoon positioned to do my best work. And today's guest, Mofota Sefali, is on that short list of people who inspire me. We've only recently met, but I've been following her on social media and in other places for a while, and have heard of the work that she's doing. And I'm so thrilled to have Mofota here as my guest today. So welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here, Eric, and thank you for having me. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon. We're at different time zones. Hi. Thank you for taking time out of your hectic days to be with us today.
So Mofota is joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa, in the city or in the Johannesburg area?
So in a surrounding suburb. So
in the surrounding suburbs.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So Johannesburg, South Africa. So it is 7:00 p.m. her time, noon Central Time here. And I'm so glad that she was able to join us. Just earlier this week, I spoke to someone in Melbourne, Australia. And I had to have a lunch date at 4 p.m. local time, and he had to get up at 7 in the morning, his time, to make it work. So I just love, it's funny, I love that technology allows us to have this conversation today. All right, let's kick this off, Mofota. First of all, people know about my lunch dates that I choose my guests and my guests choose the topics. So I go to people that I really like, that I'm really inspired by, and I say, I want to spend 30 minutes with you. And they say, fantastic, I want to talk about fill in the blank. You chose a topic that we've entitled The Pan-African View on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So what is it about who you are, the work that you do, that has led you to choose this topic for our conversation today?
So I'm an HR professional based in South Africa, and I spoke at the SHRM conference last year and was really interested in some of the offerings that were available in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. I was also, in my over 10 years experience, I dabbled a little bit in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So there's a lot that's happening there in terms of how organizations try to transform and build their cultures, etc. But it's a space that I'm passionate about because, just being a person living in South Africa and seeing what's happening right now, the current events in the US and some of the current events in South Africa, I thought this would be a nice topic to chat about, and that the panelists and the attendees can actually contribute to as well.
Yes, thank you for that. I speak with or invite any number of guests on, a sort of a diverse selection of guests, many of whom are service providers. They're representing their own organizations, and I've enjoyed conversations with them. I also love that you are a practitioner. You are an HR practitioner, and you do this work. And so I know enough about you to know that you are also serving HR professionals in your own way, but the fact that you're doing this work in the way that you are, I think really lends itself well to our conversation. I'm also excited about this because, as you and I have shared, or as I've shared with you, my wife and I went on our honeymoon to South Africa in the summer of 2018. And we visited Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was for, I think, at least 12 years in a particular cell that he had that we saw. We visited District 6, which we may talk about a little bit. We visited the townships around Cape Town and saw the lasting impact of apartheid in that area, in that country, and in that city in particular when we were in Cape Town. And so I'm really interested to hear the perspective that you are going to bring to this conversation. So I don't have an agenda. People know that this isn't scripted. I want to ask you, how would you like to set up this conversation for the time that we have left? What is some perspective that you can give us about what you're bringing to the conversation and what your passion is for this topic in particular?
Absolutely. I'd love to tell your story. And the
Please.
story is related to the concept that I'm exploring, which is internalized racism. So you talk about District 6 and how the impact of apartheid has had long-lasting effects, right? I found, the question that you asked was very interesting. You said, how do the current events in the United States resonate with someone who's living with South Africa? And I thought, what are the differences and what are the similarities? So essentially, what I looked at was African people, or Black people, if I may, have the similar issues. However, the biggest differences are probably that in South Africa, Black people are the majority. They are 81% of the population. And in the US, it's, slightly less than that. I think it's around 13%. So I really want to talk about, and I hope everyone will enjoy this, because we would really just like to talk about how have people been affected by racism, and what is it, I think maybe what I'm also trying to bring to this table is, what is it that we can do for ourselves to ensure as Black people that we survive and we understand the biases and maybe we understand the impacts that just being exposed to racism, what that has had on us.
Great, wonderful. So you mentioned that you have a story to tell. And so what is that story that you would like to tell to begin our conversation?
Okay, so this is a story about a friend of mine, someone that I went to college with, and someone that I shared an apartment with. We had a lot of common interests. One of the fondest stories that I remember about her is that we were one of the two crazy people who used to spend our pocket money on going to the gym because we thought going to the gym was such a treat. So this is something that we carried with us in our first jobs, and we thought, wow, gym membership is like absolutely everything. And I remember when we went into the circuit area and, we were like pushing weights with our legs. It was like such good fun. Anyways, a couple of years down the line, I, fell pregnant and I was expecting my son. And I didn't realize how much of my pregnancy journey she had absorbed, a really good part. So I was pleasantly surprised when she shared with me that she's actually expecting. She said, look, I have some good news to share. We're expecting and I'm really excited. And the one thing that I remember about your pregnancy is that your gynae was so good. I think I shared with her that, she remembered that, I said, my gynecologist is so calm. He's so patient. He gets that this is my first child and that I want, this is a very precious journey for me. So irrespective of whatever question I ask him, he doesn't get irritated. He's just really just the best. And I think I had the best birthing experience because of him. And, she remembers things like, I used to say it was important for me if my appointment was at 12 o'clock, the waiting room wouldn't be full at his practice. And I would be there at 11:45, and 12 o'clock, I would see the doctor. And that meant a lot to me. And I remember her telling me, she says, I remember you said even the music and the ambiance in the waiting room was very, very calm. So she was obviously wanting to have the same journey. She says, this is my first child, and I really want it to be a pleasure, and I delightfully shared the contact details with him, with her, and his contact details with her. And so I follow up a couple of weeks later, I think 2 or 3 weeks later, to find out how it went. And I say to her, so how did it go? Tell me, how are you feeling? How are you doing? You know, do you have morning sickness? And how is it at the doctor's? And she says, oh, we decided not to use him because he's Black. So I think I was a little shocked. I really must admit, and I asked you, sorry, can you please repeat that? You decided not to use him because he is Black? She says, yes, we think that a white doctor is going to be, a white gynecologist is going to be better suited because this is our first child and we want our child to be in very safe hands. And yes, so we've decided to go with a white Jewish man. So I was completely gobsmacked. I said to her, but you do realize that you like the journey that you liked. And when I shared this man's experience, he was Black then. And it's not like a skin color changed when you called him. The entire experience is based on him being Black. And she said, yes, I understand that, but this is very important to us. We just don't want anything to go wrong. So I then said to her, I said, this doesn't make any sense to me because I can bet that you and I, born in the 70s, that we were probably not delivered by a gynecologist. At best, we were probably delivered by a doctor. But I also think that chances are much higher that we were delivered by a nurse or a midwife. Our parents were definitely not even delivered by a doctor. I can tell you that without even knowing anything. And our grandparents who lived in mud huts were delivered in that environment. So childbirth is not that complicated. If you look at the rest of the African continent, in every single Black person, or the millions of the Black people that are older than us, probably came through a midwife. So this doesn't make any sense to me because this guy is not just a doctor, but he's also a gynecologist. So he's a specialist. He's gone to school to study this further. So he is able to deliver your child safely. So I don't understand what you're saying. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And we had a back and forth. I kept on trying to make her understand that what she doesn't say, what she's saying doesn't make any sense because she loved the experience. And anyways, she ultimately said, look, my husband and I have decided that we want a white doctor. And okay, so I know a queue when I get one. And I clearly was now pushing into a boundary and in a zone, in a private zone that I was not supposed to be in. And I let it go also because I also want to be invited to the baby shower and I want to continue being friends with this person. But it bothered me. It bothered me in that I started thinking about how I choose doctors. I started questioning myself and I said, how did I choose? I literally went through a list of my doctors in my head and I said, okay, my GP, my family doctor, who's also my son's doctor, is an African female, right? And is she good? I really love her. I wouldn't change her for the world. She's very calm, empathetic, she's kind, and I have a good relationship with her. And I then said, my optometrist who I love to death, is an Indian female. My dentist is an Indian female. And then I said, when were the times when I used white doctors? And I said, okay, I used a white doctor when I needed to get braces. And so my orthodontist and my maxillofacialist were white. And I think at the time, because there were no Black specialists, but I realized that I never considered skin color as being important when I selected a doctor. It had never occurred to me. So I then wondered why she would think that it's important. And I realized that I honestly, I felt like there was something wrong. And she came to me, you know, I think it was a couple of years later. I mean, she's had the baby. She's probably on her second one. And she says, you know, one of the things that I admire the most about you, Mofota, is that you didn't grow up in South Africa. You grew up in Lesotho. My dad worked for SADC, so we lived, you know, in the Southern Africa region. So we lived in Botswana. And those countries were slightly different in that they became independent before South Africa did. And I think, to be honest, racism wasn't as, it was basically colonialism, but the apartheid era in South Africa had probably, you know, was more damaging than the colonialism that we had on the rest of the continent. And, you know, she always says to me, she says, the way that I see you, you're born free. I mean, in the way that you carry yourself, you're more confident, you are, you know who you are, and your parents were there to fight your battles and to help you fight your battles and to help you understand your own identity and who you are. And she says, I want that for my children. I don't want my children to have this thing where they think they are less than. So anyways, you know, beautiful story, good ending is that she's ultimately decided that she doesn't want to live in South Africa anymore, and she doesn't. And she lives in one of the free countries. And her goal really is to tackle that mindset. And it is, you know, it is a very heartbreaking story because we think that in South Africa you have 81% Black people and that apartheid is over. It's been 25, 26 years. But the effects and what it's done to people's psyches is actually incredibly painful. I love my friend to death, and I remember thinking I shouldn't have been as hard on her, but I really was trying to drive a point that doctors are really good. I mean, you can't use, you know, pick a skin color. And I wasn't saying that to ridicule her, but I think I was honestly trying to show her that you're not making a rational decision. And in my trying to be right, I didn't realize that it wasn't about me being right. It was about her state of mind and where she was and what she was dealing with. And at the time, we didn't know what that was. We had to live through more experiences for us to understand that there has been a seriously negative impact on people's minds from racism, from being exposed to such a terrible condition and such a dehumanizing condition, to an extent where people truly believe, Black people truly believe, that white is superior to Black. And this is, you know, this forms the basis of our chat today. And I really hope to unpack something that I've just been dabbling in a little, something that I am still to learn more about, something that I'm still to figure out what to do with the information that I will gather. But I think it's interesting in that, you know, I'm hoping to just really, for now, create the awareness to say, this is what it is. And only us can save us.
I have to admit that my own internet connection was cut for part of that story, so I missed a portion of it. But I'm seeing what's coming into the chat, and I really appreciate people including the reactions in the chat. And people are saying, you know, really powerful story. That conditioning, I think, is something that we are so focused on here with everything that's certainly going on in the United States. And part of what I'm getting from the portion of your story that I was able to get was that is something that certainly is not unique to the United States, is certainly a part of your own experience and the experience of the country where you are from. And so I would like to ask you at this point, what are some of the additional ways beyond the story that you've told that you have seen this play out in your daily experience, in your life, in what you've seen from your surroundings in the Johannesburg region that might be similar in some ways to what we've experienced here and are experiencing, but also might be very different in the unique history of apartheid that you're familiar with?
Well, I think what also bothers me about it, and it's not, maybe a Johannesburg thing, is I was looking at the World Health Organization stats, and they state that 77% of women in Nigeria bleach their skin to become lighter, followed by Togo, which is at about 56%. And, it kind of trickles down, but South Africa is at about 35%. So that in itself, and I think it also happens, in the US, I'm not too sure, but I've had a comment where, a lady that I know from Zambia, we were going for job interviews, and we just happened to be in the market space at the same time. And she says to me, Mofota, you'll probably get it because your skin is slightly fairer than mine. We weren't going for the same job, but she was kind of saying that because she's darker in complexion, it's harder for her to get a job. And that, I thought, gosh, okay, that can't be a thing that people actually believe in. But people actually bleach their skin to be perceived as lighter, and they want to be brighter and light and whiter. So that's another thing that bothered me. There's actually a thing on Netflix now that's playing. It's called Skin, and if you watch it, you'll just realize how deeply rooted racism is, and how people have been so saturated with self-hatred to an extent that they actually want to change their appearance. And I think one person that I wondered about was Michael Jackson, but friends of mine were saying, no, he had, like a genetic skin condition where he needed to get surgery to kind of
Right.
correct that. Yeah. So that's another, that's more evidence, Eric, that there's an issue.
We will share resources via email with all attendees after this conversation. One of the things that I want to make sure we share is the blog post that you wrote recently leading up to this conversation. I have shared it once already, but I want to make sure that people get that again, because you really spend a little bit of time talking about this deeply held belief that whiteness or lighter skin, really there is a superiority to that. And the way you described it is that it's not simply the white people saying that there's a superiority there, but it's Black people themselves believing in some way that the lighter skin is superior in some real sense. Could you talk about that just a little bit more? Because that really struck me from your blog post.
So internalized racism as a concept, really simplistically, is it's almost like the after effect of being exposed to racism. And in my blog, what I talk about is, different, I've referenced a few people who have studied it. And what they talk about is basically, what is it? It's being exposed to racism and having your ways and your views rejected for so long. So if you think about how models are defined in the Western world, they're generally very thin and light and tall, right? So someone like me will never ever make it in that world. But I see, the world's moving where people are actually talking about body shaming and saying it's not right. But if you've been exposed to, and internalized racism speaks to, if you've been exposed to things that reject your ways, you start to feel like you are not good enough as a Black person. So if my food is not, on the menu in the top restaurants, I'll think, oh, maybe that's because our food is not great enough.
Right.
So that concept pretty much talks about, yes, we've tried to correct in South Africa, in Africa, in the US, trying to correct the numbers per se. Maybe if we talk transformation, by hiring more Black people, right? However, there is something that's deeper, and what it talks about is then how, the person themselves feel like, even if I'm in this executive job, I don't think I'm good enough to perform it. And I think this is where I'm going with it in HR, to say, what is it that we can do to make sure that people feel like they're good enough to actually do their jobs? And it then talks about what it is that we can actually do to overcome the state. And I think consciousness is probably the best and a good start. So it's awareness, first of all, being aware of your own biases and whether you have this or not. I mean, I don't know if there's a way to test it, but what I would like, and what I said in my blog is, if we look at the mental models, okay, which is where the transformation needs to happen right at the bottom of the iceberg. What we're seeing now is the events and the patterns are similar, right? Whenever there's an incident, if we look at the current George Floyd incident, then there'll be the riots and the looting. That pattern is evident throughout the world, right? In Lesotho, in South Africa, in the US. So we're not really changing much, right? We're just reacting the same way, which could be deemed as dysfunctional or disruptive or not necessarily effective. So for us to really make a meaningful impact, I think, is we need to change our own mental models. And I honestly, and I'm borrowing from, Marcus Garvey, who says, you need to emancipate yourself from mental slavery. You can't go around thinking that you're not good enough. And it's light. It sounds like an easy thing to do, but I know I battle with my own self-esteem in different areas. But I think this conversation really wants to spark the awareness, and the blog as well wanted to spark the awareness that there is something that we can do, and let's take the power in our own hands to really try and deal with this monster.
Nobantu has chimed in the chat, and they've said that they're from Africa. I just don't remember which country, saying, for example, the rejection of African names in favor of Christian names, talking about how everything that we're talking about permeates every aspect of life, every facet of life. You've said a couple of times already about helping others, and the word you've referenced the workplace. So I'd love to spend a couple of minutes now talking about how this perspective that you're talking so eloquently about informs the work that you do as an HR professional in the workplace. So there's, having to deal with it daily as part of your life and part of your identity, but then you're taking this with you to the workplace, and it's informing how you interact with others and the relationships that you build with colleagues and how you do your work. I know you're very active with SHRM. You have been, and you and I have talked about how your initial visits to the United States were through those SHRM conferences, but that you are also an HR practitioner where you live. So how is everything that we're talking about today informing the work that you've chosen to do?
So disclaimer, I've drifted a bit out of diversity and inclusion, and I'm in HR information systems now, but how I think, and I haven't really fully figured it out, I think it would probably work in the culture transformation space, where people basically, it's going to be about acceptance and, the diversity we've got different people who think differently, but this work will probably plug into the inclusivity space where, like Nobantu says, for instance, I worked with Nobantu, and he's a great person. And it really, the rejection of African names, and I've always pushed my name, and I'll come back to the question, but I've always pushed my name and people mispronounce it. And when you mispronounce my name, it has a different meaning, which is actually demeaning. So things like that could then maybe be brought into the culture transformation space to say, I don't want to use my name Bernice. I would actually rather prefer that I use Mofota, irrespective of how difficult because people tell me it's difficult to pronounce, but I don't think it is. I think if I can make an effort to pronounce Nobantu, to pronounce Ellen, Mary, I think, the minimal effort that's required to understand how to pronounce my name. And thankfully, LinkedIn has already also offers us a tool where we can pronounce our names, and you can hear that. So I think, this little piece of work that we're doing, Eric, and how it can help is we can put this into our culture transformation space and the inclusivity space, and to talk about stuff, to hear out what people think. It's quite important. If someone says, please pronounce my name properly, that is important. And that should be that should be considered and not disregarded, because the minute you disregard it, you're essentially saying it's not good enough. And I actually have another story about a person who lived in the US and they were asked to shorten their name and change their last name. So things like that then contributes to that internalized racism, because then you start wondering, is my name not good enough? And
Right.
if you had parents like mine, you'll push and push, but there are people who have opted to call themselves Bernice, to call themselves or shorten their names into Mo, you know? I do that sometimes when I'm tired of my name being mispronounced, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's where we can take this little piece of evidence that we have. It'll probably sit in the biases space. I worked with a lady who actually, said to me, she said, Mofota, I was racist. And what helped me overcome this is I had to understand my own bias. I had to understand what had informed that racism, some of the experience and exposure that I'd had growing up as a child. And she spoke about how her own parents actually believed that in the church that she went to, they actually believed that God wanted white people to rule everybody else. So the work that she underwent was in the bias space and understanding and getting feedback from people that she worked with to say, I don't like it when you speak to me like this. I don't like it when you speak to me that way. But we have to have this in the dialogue and conversation somewhere.
Yeah, dialogue is a huge word. I even see this in the disc work that I do. It's if I make assumptions about your communication style, how you want to be spoken to, what you value and prioritize, I'm often missing the mark because I'm assuming that those things are going to be the same as what I value and what I prioritize and how I would want to be spoken to. And the only way that you really begin to meaningfully connect with people, as I'm hearing you say it, is to get to know them as an individual and what their preferences are and how their name should be pronounced, and rather than question those things and judge those things, accept them, and maybe dig in a little deeper and find out what's behind it. What are the stories that are behind those preferences?
Exactly.
Well, Mofota, it's already 12:30 Central Time, which means we've gotten through 30 minutes, and it always goes by so quickly. I want to end with a couple of things, but first and foremost by thanking you and saying that people are certainly going to want to connect with you following our conversation. They can stick around if they want to. Where can they find you online?
So I am present on most digital platforms. I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. Let's follow each other on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram, but those are kind of personal. So my main channels and preferences are LinkedIn and Twitter.
Wonderful. I wish we had been able to get to more about District 6 and the townships outside of Cape Town, our experience there in South Africa. I will say that one of the books that I picked up immediately following my trip is The Prison Letters of Nelson Mandela. I don't know if people can see this book. It's not a short read, but it is so worth getting through. So if you're interested at all in terms of learning more about apartheid, not Nelson Mandela in the area, The Prison Letters of Nelson Mandela is just a fantastic book to look into. So much more that we could have talked about, Mofota, but I am really thrilled that we had this chance to talk. If the rest of the people joining us appreciated our conversation, I hope you'll go back to harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates and register for additional upcoming conversations. Next week on Tuesday, I'm going to be speaking with Elena Valentine from Skill Scout, talking about how you can go from HR professional to human storyteller. Skill Scout is all about storytelling. Next Thursday with Dr. Melanie Peacock, Blended, the strategic application of work from home lessons. So as we're returning to the workplace, how can we take what we've learned working from home and have it enhance the workplace experience? And then going forward from that, so many throughout August and into September with Enrique Rubio, who's the founder of the Hacking HR community, Wendy Daly, who's one of the co-hosts of the HR Social Hour half-hour podcast, Dr. Esther Jackson, I just added. She's in Detroit, Michigan, is involved with ATD, among other things, and is going to talk with us about the role of adaptability quotient, AQ, in talent development. So why is it important for us as individuals to learn skills related to how we're responding to the marketplace, to our organizations, and to our fellow colleagues. So much more coming up. All of that at harmonyinsights.com/lunchdates. And honestly, all of it entirely free, because I want to hang out with fun people, and you all are fun people. I'm going to encourage, if you want to, or if you need to take off for your afternoon or whatever time it is where you are tuning in from, you're certainly welcome to do that. We hope this has been an inspiring conversation for you. For those of you who want to stick around, you are welcome to do so. Mofota is going to spend a few additional minutes with us answering your questions, hearing your contributions. All you have to do is unmute yourself at this point. But Mofota, again, thank you so much for spending a half hour with us.
Thank you very much, Eric, for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. I'm reading some of the comments. People are saying 30 minutes was not enough. But yeah, thank you for attending, and thank you for making time.